Hi, everybody. This is Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better For Worse.
Today we have a special guest that's been long anticipated. We have Don Blair with us here on our Facebook Live. Don has been a part of our Nosework community here in the Midwest for a long time. So we get to know him a little bit better and chat with him and ask him all kinds of questions. So hopefully you guys bought some questions. So Don, if most of us know who you are and all about you, but if you'd like to tell us a little bit about you, that would be fantastic.
So, for those of you that don't know me, I started with dogs when I was about 8 years old with 4-H out in Colorado. Started showing dogs, got involved with Schutzen Club when I learned how to drive out in Colorado Springs with the then vice president of Ray Allen Corporation. Got bit by the dog bug, did a lot of dog showing, obedience. When I was 20 years old, I apprenticed with the head trainer for the Denver Police Department and turned 21 at the police academy. Worked dual purpose patrol narcotic dog for about 5 years throughout a couple cities in Colorado. Went to U.S. Customs. I was with them for 21 years in a variety of different positions, from a handler all the way up to a branch chief out in Nogales, Arizona, and got hired away to the private sector a couple different times. Went back to Customs, was with research and development and oversaw the breeding program. And then since then, I've been with the private sector or doing my own thing. So that's it in a nutshell.
Hey, your
Marcus
son
says hi.
Marcus says hi. Your son is online. One of the reasons we've been wanting to have Don on is most of us in the Midwest have been judged by Don, and Don has an interesting effect on most folks. Everybody gets so nervous or worried or to show under him. So this was an opportunity for us to get to know him a little better and maybe hopefully calm some of the nerves when they see Don as your judge. And be able to, like I said, get to know him better and kind of like a lot of the judges we've had on before about, what they look for in a team or what are some of the things they see more often. Don has traveled a little bit, mostly in the Midwest, right, Don? You've been doing judging?
Yeah, I started in with Nosework down in Alabama when I was working for a private company, but detailed to Auburn University's detection school, and started judging there. And then you were my first contact when I moved up here to Chicago.
Right, and we were lucky to have him because since then Don, like I said, has done a lot of judging, but he's also done workshops and training and all kinds of cool stuff up here since he's been here. So he's really gotten very integrated into the nurse work community. So now we're gonna. I'm gonna ask you questions, and you guys, if you have questions for Don, shoot. Put them out there. We'll get them answered. So the question I have, as a judge, what do you see is the most common error, mistake, and I don't want to say error, but common issue you see with teams when they're when they're searching? I know a lot of us are nervous, but from that, what do you see that's mostly an issue for folks?
So I was a competitor for many, many years. I'm getting ready to go back into some competition with my own personal dog. And one of the easiest ways I found to alleviate the nervousness is really good, tough preparation. When you have trained above and beyond what you're going to be judged for, that will alleviate a lot of the nerves. If you're praying to the dog gods the night before the trial, you ain't ready. And so that's sometimes people go out on a wing and a prayer and it works out just fine. Unfortunately, most of the time it does not. And so you're pissing away money when you're not prepared for the trial. And then the biggest thing that I see as a mistake is the lack of preparation, not only for the dog, but also for the handler. When people don't know the rules, when they don't know one of the greatest things, and you've heard me tell people, is volunteer before you trial. That takes away the mystique and the magic of what you're about to go through. And once you see that from behind the scenes, I think that also alleviates a lot of the nervousness, as well as you get to see other teams compete and watch those mistakes so that you hopefully learn from them and don't make them. And then I'm sure anyone who's trained with me also knows that I really like a good search pattern and dogs that can follow a good search pattern. Remember, this is a team sport, so we want two people and two entities involved in the search. When you just cut Rexy off leash and say, "Go with God, Rexy, I hope we do good," you're abandoning your partnership or your responsibilities for that team effort. And you don't have to be the overbearing supervisor, but you're there to watch what the dog has searched, make minor corrections, or kind of be the advocate for your dog. If you see they haven't done something, you can be there to coach them through it. And then, you learn from those trials so that you address those issues in the off time with your training program. But if you failed 2 or 3 trials in a row miserably, it's time to stop trialing and put that money into training and really get the training issues ironed out.
Right.
So we're getting some questions coming in, but I have a clarity moment that I would just like to ask you about. So volunteering or looking at most of your score sheets, I think a lot of us know the 2 words that are on there a lot, right? Which is search plan. So I get a lot of questions, that's me and my dog, or I thought I did one. So I know how you like to do it, right? Very detailed, left to right, that sort of thing. Can you elaborate on what a search plan could be? Not necessarily, right, your left to right. Like, what would you look for if somebody has a plan?
So a search plan is just making sure that you've covered everything behind you so that when somebody screams 30 seconds, you don't go, "Oh crap, I need to go back because he showed a little interest here," or "I didn't really search that very well." The search plan is knowing that everything that's behind you has been cleared by you and your dog. And when you get the 30 seconds, whatever is in front of you is the only option for AIDS being missed or AIDS not being discovered yet. That everything behind you has been cleared and cleared well. And so for me, that does look like a certain way. But I've also given pronouns for people that they're doing the ping pong method, but they're doing a really good job of it. And the ping pong method is simply the dog's bouncing back and forth, but he's doing a good thorough search as they're moving forward.
Right.
I would prefer a more directed search that the dog has been trained to do. When I say directed, I don't mean the handler's putting their hand out to point out everything that the dog has missed. That's not the plan. The plan is to have a reinforcement history to where the dog does a true 3-dimensional search. So the dog is breaking planes, they're going under tables, they're going under chairs, they're investigating voids in the search area on their own that we have established in our training protocols and our training program. So the dogs, and remember, I really preach this, the dog's jobs, the dog's job descriptions are very different than the handler's job descriptions. And so while the handler and the trainer do the training and the imprinting on the dog, on game day, we have 2 separate jobs. The handler is there to be a reinforcement machine, support their dog, and make sure the dog is working their way through the search. The dog's job is to do the search, recognize odor, take the handler to odor, and then wait for that reinforcement. And so when you see the handlers overcompensating and they're dragging their dog around the room, that's not a good search. When you see the dog doing free willy, running amok, hoping that odor smacks him across the mouth, that's also not a pretty search. And we've had some really good dogs here in the Midwest that were very successful off leash. But those are very unique individual dogs. And most people don't possess those dogs. So if you have an average dog or even a below average dog as far as their drive and desire, then throughout the training to make the dog proficient at a training plan, the reinforcement is quadruple that of a dog that ping pongs around haphazardly until odor grabs them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Joanna and I have had students that have trained with you and says, well, this is what Don says to do. I go, I don't think so. Because I know Don very well, and I'm guessing no. So, because basically, it's basically saying it's not, like you said, dragging them around the search area, but it's also not letting them go wherever they want. It's somewhere in the middle, right? Like
Well,
the dog should be able to get to, and that's a great explanation about that everything behind you should be searched, whatever that plan may be, right?
Well, and there's an enormous difference, Nancy. If I'm working on one side of the room and my dog alerts and has a mental confirmation that he has inhaled trained odor and goes and shoots across the room, he's always allowed to do that. Odor always trumps search plan. But he's not allowed to drag me all over the room because he wants to go, lick the bubble gum under the desks in the classroom. That's more interesting than looking for the odor.
Right.
And time again, and we just did it. I did some privates this weekend. We just did it again this weekend. I allowed the people to cut the dog off leash. So let's see what they're going to do. And the dogs did what dogs do. They go to the things that they find interesting, not the things that we are paying good money to have them go and find.
Right.
So just the presence it's not anything. It's not a higher or lower. It's not a boss subservient employee. It's a team. It's a true team. And so when you just have the presence there, that you're leading the ship by your presence, right? That allows the dog to free up and go and do what we've trained them to do, which is hunt independently with just our presence. We don't want a dog that keeps looking back and looking back. Are we close? Right. They're playing the hot and cold game, right? And they're not truly hunting the odor. And that's what we're really after for a great detection dog, is a dog that is black and white in clarity on what they're looking for and what their tasks are. And then we know that doesn't happen all the time. There's going to be interruptions in that search. So when that happens, that's where we want the handler to be really, really well thoughtful and trained in the least amount of interference to get the most out of the dog back into the game. So, if you go, no, Fluffy, that's wrong, you've just broken Fluffy and you're never getting her back. But if you say lightly, let's go, move on, then that's probably enough for certain dogs' titration levels that they're like, oh, mom's not mad at me, I can continue to work. Right. And so that's where that really, truly, canine team, that phrase has been around for a long, long time. And you and Joanne both know me. So has the phrase, trust your dog. And I say bullshit on that. Don't trust a dog because the dog is going to do doggy things. Trust your training, and then you can trust your dog.
Right. So Diana asked, which I know the answer to this, how has nose work changed since you started eons ago to now, since you were one of the first judges in our area and you've judged from the beginning until currently? How do you think nose work, the NACSW specifically, has changed?
I think it's advanced just magically. In the old days, by the time you got to the 3, your dog was 14 and ready to retire. Now we're seeing dogs getting their 3s at 2 years old, 3 years old, with really, really good smoking scores. So I think everybody in the system has really evolved. I think it's gotten much better competition across the board. And across the board, I think I'm seeing much better dogs across the board.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think a lot of us that started, like, I just got my championship on my dog, but she's 12.
Yeah.
And it was all, well, and granted, she started when she was a little older, but yeah, a lot of trying to get into trials was a challenge. Some of the searches were they're much more difficult because Ron was setting them.
Yep. Now that they're selling videos, you can go back and see what some of those original searches were like.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, I think I would agree. It's a little more organized and a little more consistent, I guess, if you will. So I had Shelly and Joy had similar questions, and this is a big discussion point, right? What's the best way to start in nose work, and what's the age? What age and what technique, food or odor? Because there's a big discussion about that, where you start on food and odor. And I use the NACSW method, as Joanne does now, where they start them on food. And everybody says that the reason that you shouldn't start them on food is because they have more trouble with distractors, which isn't true. I've had many dogs that come through that started on odor first, and they're hitting those distractions just as hard as they would if the dogs that were on food. So that's not the reason. So I know you have specific ways you start dogs too.
So a little bit of the pairing at the start, there's nothing wrong with that, right? We would do the same thing if we were using a retrieved dog. We would scent an object, right? And then we would throw that object, and the dog is picking up the odor through that. So that's true Pavlovian training, right? We are pairing something the dog really appreciates with something the dog is completely unfamiliar with.
Sure.
But we want to do that for the least amount of time possible, and then jump into the Skinnerian way, where the dog actually performs a behavior that brings or doesn't bring reinforcement. And then through our environment and our creativity with our training aids, we want to allow the environment and the odor and presence of the odor to dictate the training of the dog.
Right.
And then I know a lot of people, it's very popular when the dog is having trouble, they drop back to pairing. That's ridiculous. That's a human feel good. And of course, you're going to get excellent results with that. Now, we're not talking about a really, emotionally wrecked dog that may need to be on the pairing for longer than a normal dog. And I joke about this, but with tongue in cheek for myself, I find it very serious. If you've got a rescue dog and you've had the dog for any amount of time, then what are you doing with the dog that he's not advancing? We can only use the rescue dog, he was abused, she was abused story for so long. And then we need to start making gains with these dogs. And I think a lot of times it's a great story. I love the stories, but we can't clutch to those stories. They were a rescue dog 5 years ago. What the hell's happened in the last 5 years?
Yeah.
And so now when we have those kind of dogs, and I've seen them, you've seen them at trials, some of those dogs, the owners forgot about the abuse and marched forward and did a great training program. And those are highly competitive dogs today.
Yeah.
And so when you choose the way you're going to introduce the odor, and then the reinforcement system, and then the clarity in training, you're going to make enormous gains with any dog, whether they have temperamental issues or not.
Right.
And then if they don't have those, then the learning grows exponentially with every training session.
Yeah. And to that, Don, I agree. We work with lots of rescue dogs and stuff, and they're doing just fine. And it is for a trainer, it is working with the handler to let that go. I always tell people we are our dog's caretaker 90% of the time. 10% of the time, though, we're their teammate.
Yes.
They have their job, we have our job. And letting them and making that break every time they cross that start line is tough, but doable. So
Yeah.
here's my question. There's other questions too, but I had a question on the retrieve. Like, you're really big on keeping the dog very motivated throughout its career, right? From when you start them through elite, right? Because if you start to not do that motivation, like you do a great job with the tease downs and things like that, where you can keep that dog, strong on odor and very motivated. What do you feel like? I know you start your dogs on a towel with the odor. Is that something someone that has a retriever that enjoys that? Is that something they could do intermittently down the road, every so often, to keep the dog, engaged? Or is that something you just start with in the beginning and then leave it?
So remember, the odor introduction portion is just the baby steps of the beginning. And so we have to look at our overall goals. Overall goals is heavy duty competition. Then we won't keep the retrieve
Okay.
for the life of the dog while he's competing, right? We may go back to it
Yeah,
as
that's
a reinforcement once in a while, but it's not practical for trials.
right. That's what I'm asking for training.
Yeah. If I'm playing with my dog for 15 seconds, I just gave away first place.
Right.
But on the other hand, for working dogs, right, they have to work 6, 7, 8 hours sometimes, and doing hour to 2 hour searches back to back. So for those dogs, we do want them a little bit over the top, if you will, so that they have that concentration for those lengths of times. But even you and I, all of us have seen, Joanne's been there too. We've seen some really, really top-notch dogs that started with the retrieve method for a short amount of time to get the odor introduction, and
Right.
then they're on food and they perform just as well, with the edge of the competition in their favor, because they can gobble the food and immediately go back to work without the conflict. And even in the best dogs, there's going to be a smidgen of conflict to give up that toy.
But you think it's okay to use the towel for training, like to keep it fun for the dog, not at trials.
Not at trials, intermittently for
Intermittently,
training.
right?
Yep. And then the other thing to do is be more creative with the way that you're reinforcing the dog with food. Run
Right.
away from the dog for a little bit, make a chase game out of it, throw the food away from the hide. People often, even senior people, they want to feed their dog close to the hide. Remember, once the dog is in reinforcement mode, his nose isn't working. He's waiting for the food. He's not still sniffing, and he's not still going, oh, we're close to the birch, bring my food over here. The nose is completely off, especially with our senior dogs. So it's just like if we were training a bomb dog. It's not really a good idea to throw your tennis ball at the bomb. And none of our dogs break when we reward them away from the bomb.
Right.
They know that behavior is done, and that behavior brings reinforcement. So it's only for the newbie young dogs that it's important to get that reinforcement.
Right.
Hide. After that, it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree 100% with that. All right.
So hold on. Shelly had one other piece to her question that I think is important to mention, only because we had this conversation last night.
Joanne, stop for a second.
Yep.
If every time you move close, and Nancy, when you move close, I can't hear you.
Okay.
So if you just hold back a little bit, and then I can hear you crystal clear.
Can you hear me now?
Choppy. Back away.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. So one of Shelly's other questions was characteristics to look for, right, in a dog that you want. And I think we had the whole conversation about you still have to live with them. So what you're looking for should not be what we're looking for, right?
No, I mean my dog Aldo is a monster retriever, and he's just fine at home. We're finding more and more with the work dogs, Joanne, that they have to have an off switch. A lot of the dogs that we were selecting in the 80s and the 90s were so far over the top that they just never had an off switch. And the residual of that is when you took them to work, they weren't nearly the dogs that they were on training days, because they've been up all night spinning and howling in their crates. And so it actually changed the way that I select dogs. When I was in Iraq, I had selected some crazy good drivey dogs, but they couldn't live with them when the dog's living in a crate 18 hours a day in a tent in the desert with 30 other guys. The guys wanted to kill that dog. He's spitting in the crate, he's chewing his food bowl, and then when he gets out, he can't concentrate. So all the attributes that you guys are looking for a high-level detection dog are the same dogs I'm looking for. They've got to have that off switch.
Yeah, because it is hard to live with a dog that doesn't have one, let me tell you. I did that. Okay, so I had somebody was asking about a trained final response. So one of the things that I have seen
already.
Yeah, I have seen, especially in canine nose work, and I think you have too, Don, that trained final response has gone really, really bad. They have missed the whole behavior chain, and you explained it beautifully. So I'm going to let you do it on what is a trained final response, because people are missing it, and so the dogs are confused as to what you're asking them for.
So it's a wonderful question. So every dog in nose work has a trained final response, whether the owners want to call it that or name it that. That trained final response is the thing or the action, the behavior that the dog does that makes you say yes and reach into your pouch and feed the dog. So to be consistent, the behavior chain goes like this. We have our start, we have our hunt discriminate, we have the actual alert to trained odor. After the actual alert to trained odor, we have tracing to source. I call it the interest phase, but that may be 4 inches on a vehicle, right? The dog has alerted and he goes right into source, so that tracing the source is very small. Or we have a dog that hits from 100 yards away. Now that tracing the source it's going to last for 15, maybe 30 or 40 seconds, tracing the source. That's where we see the dog bracketing right to left. When the dog gets to source, or where it believes source is, right? If it's an inaccessible, he's as close to source as they can get.
Right.
Then we want to have modified the dog's behavior to a point where it has an extreme amount of reliability. So that could be a paw touch, a nose touch, a freeze. There are a variety of different things we could train the dog to do. But it is a behavior modification specifically directed, overseen, and trained by the training team and the handler, so that is the dog's signal that my job is over. It is time for you to come in and pay me. And so what happens is, because it's a competition, especially at the level 3, where many dogs are broken, right? We want to win, we want to get our titles. So they interrupt the behavior chain. And so after the alert, but before the mental confirmation, they jump in there and say, alert. And so now they've interrupted what the dog is accustomed to, or they have made the trained final response so important that it supersedes tracing the source. And then that's where you get the no, or you get the wheres, because the dog has not finished the behavior chain.
Right.
And then when the dog gives the behavior chain, if it is giving falses, then it is not trained, right? The dog now is fishing again, playing the hot and cold game of, is this right? I'm sitting, I'm doing that thing you want me to do,
Right.
but they haven't clarified odor plus trace to source plus trained final response always brings reinforcement. Instead, it's mom drags her feet. Maybe there's odor, maybe there's not. I check in with mom. She moves her hand towards the food pouch. I'm almost getting paid. And odor has never had anything to do with it. That's how we break dogs.
Right. Because I've seen people who've tried to teach a trained final response, and they made the trained final response so important that that's what the dog thinks that's what it's getting paid for. I've seen that more often than anything else. Look how cool he's sitting, or he's downing, or he's whatever it is. And the dog's like, because they've made that piece so important, instead of that whole behavior chain, that is what's important.
Well, and like you said too, Nance, right? One of the things with that, when you teach that early on, under stress, or you're being weird in a trial or whatever, the dog throws that out because they're like, I don't know, it's what I got paid for originally.
So, Joanne, that brings up a really good point also, that when we're choosing the trained final response, we want to choose something the dog does not do naturally or all the time.
Right.
People say, well, my dog likes to use his feet, so I'll do a paw touch. No. When the dog's under a little stress or pressure, what do you think he's going to touch? I'm going to touch everything with my paw because that's my default behavior.
Right.
So in those instances, we're going to use a nose touch, or we're going to use something that the dog never offers, except when it's at source or as close as it can get to odor.
Right. So I had so there's a question that somebody has about doing a cocktail or doing the odors separately. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so here's the real science behind a cocktail. If one of you very wealthy nosework people wants to do the experiment, I will gladly be a subject matter expert for you. We can take a bunch of odors, right? We run them under a gas chromatograph. It doesn't matter what the odors are. There's only going to be one winner. And so just using narcotics, for an example, if I have marijuana mixed with heroin, mixed with cocaine, when I run that on a gas chromatograph, overwhelmingly, the most vaporous chemicals are all from marijuana. So when people do a cocktail, they think they're training on all the odors, but that is not how the dog's nose works. The
Right.
dog's nose works, do the least amount of work I can to get the most amount of reward. So every time I pick up this odor, that is going to be the odor that I get. Cocktails are a complete no-no. Invest the time, and it's no more time, and you'll have a by far much more reliable dog. The NACSW, when they did the cocktails, it sounds cool, but the dog is still, I don't know what the chemical is because nobody's done the gas chromatograph. But if you ran those 3 odors or 4 odors or 10 odors, one odor will always be the most vaporous. So say, for example, we have anise, clove, and birch. We run those 3. For the example, in this case, we're going to say clove beats out everybody. So we remove clove, and we now just do anise and birch. One of those is going to overwhelmingly trounce the other one. And so when you put them all together, there's still only one clear winner that the dog is actually searching for. And so when you have those cocktails, if the dog knows all 3 odors, he's still only finding the most vaporous one. And
Right.
that's if everything is completely equal. If Joanne's loading our Q-tips and she happens to put a smidge more birch than half of the clove and half of the anise, maybe it's just the birch, even though clove might be stronger, because it's overwhelmingly a stronger odor in this little tiny experiment on this one training aid.
Right. So yeah, and that's, well, we don't use a I think the NACSW, I don't think ever started them on a cocktail, but they would combine odors, and they don't do, I don't think we're doing that anymore. I mean, I haven't done it in forever.
So Pam had a question. Can you talk about arousal levels and how to handle that in a search?
A topic near and dear to Joanne's heart.
I can talk about it.
So that's just one, Joanne, that's away from the searches. We need to find out what's triggering the dog's arousal, right? Sometimes it's just the stimulation of a strange place, the crowds,
breathing,
a little excited and nervous, right? And so trying to control as much of those as possible. And then at the end of the day, a lot of people don't want to deal with this, but if the dog can't function, then we need to find a way for the dog to function. So there's several avenues we can go with this. One of them is giving the dog an alternative behavior. You can't do this if you're doing this. So you can't sit and stare at me and growl at the lady next door or have your hackles come up, right? Or you can't do a nose touch. Now, this is not perfect training. This is problem solving. And then at the end of the day, physically lowering the dog's arousal level away from the training site and saying, you're not going to behave like this, unacceptable, pulling the opportunity for reinforcement out for a dog that really, really loves it will start to change their behaviors. And then when everything else has been exhausted, I would not hesitate to put in compulsion on a dog that we knowingly put it in, so we knowingly take it out. This is not a lifelong proposition. It's not like in the old days in the Schutzen Club, right? A dog shows up at 8 weeks old with a prong collar. You see the same dog when he's 8 years old and he still has the prong collar on.
Right.
Haven't fixed anything. It's just
Right.
been managed, and not even managed properly. So
Right.
when we just talk about doing anything adversive, we want to talk about this is how it's going to be planned. Then we're going to grade the behavior. And if behavior maintains or gets worse, then we were just mean to the dog. That adversive had nothing to do with it. If, on the other hand, we see a lowering of the behavior issues, then we know that has worked. But it's still not going to be for the lifeline of the dog, because behavior, especially corrections, right? They have a habit of getting a little harder, getting a little harder, getting a little harder. That's not the way we want to go. We want to give it just enough where it wipes that idea off the table so that it's no longer in the dog's repertoire. And then we have to be really calculated that we backfill that with another behavior. If you're taking something away, you must backfill that void. Otherwise, there's an enormous possibility that behavior not only comes back, but it comes back 10 times stronger.
Right. Well, I like your and we usually what we use a lot for our pet dogs is a lot of the competing behavior, Don. That works really well. Usually we have them sit or down or something to just bring their brain back down and into their heads before we start working them. And that seems to, for most dogs, to work well. And even for Bamasaurus, even though he and I had a little come to Jesus meeting a few years ago, and he's all better now.
Yeah. Well, and one of those things with dogs like that too, right? If they're really driving into the work, just settling them down for a second does two things. It's frustrating because you're taking the opportunity for me to work away from me. But then if you time it correctly, it's that, okay, I'm ready. And then they start to give you those clear-headed signals. I'm now ready to go back to work.
Mm-hmm. And they do a great job when they are too. They're wonderful.
Yes.
They kick. I mean, it's beautiful to watch when they finally get that focus. So Dave had a question. Do you find regional differences in nosework judging? If so, does that cause conflicts between judges at individual trials when paired with a judge from a different region? Like,
oh, no, I mean, the rules are the same nationwide. So if I'm doing an NACSW trial in Alabama or in Illinois or in Indiana, the rules are always the same, and I apply the rules the same for everybody. So there's no difference. I think there are some differences in the training programs and what dogs are kind of weak on with the different areas. But I as a judge, nothing changes for me. I have the rules, I apply the rules, and that's always the way that it's going to be.
Mm. And I would agree with you. As a CO going from region to region, everything's the same. Trials are the same. You just see different strengths and weaknesses in different areas of the country, that's like really fascinating for me. Like some areas, you'll see some things that are kind of different from the area you're used to. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I know you've answered this before, but where are you coming from, Don, when you write your comments, right? Because you're the very serious judge. You're the guy who's always, sort of pointing things out to the handler. So where are you coming from when you're thinking about writing comments on your sheet?
So when I'm judging a competition, I know I joked with both of you, when you're at the elite trial, there's no opportunity for comments because everybody's perfect at that point. And so the only time I get to do those comments is at the 1s, 2s, and the 3s. But I put the comments on there because when I see a team that I feel is going down a bad path or the wrong path, I want to put those comments in there. And I try to really do that, especially with the 1s and the 2s, because you normally only trial at a 1, maybe if you're not really great, 3 times, right? So that's 3 trials under your belt. Say you say that same bad luck at a level 2. Now you've got 6 trials under your belt with 2 passes. You're never getting out of the 3. You're going to be in purgatory for a long, long time because you've never addressed the weak spots in the team. So when I say search plan, or I say dog's not working from the start, or your leash control, these aren't when I mention leash control, it's not even, it's not I can't take away your scores for it, but these are the things that I see are affecting the team. So when the leash is wrapped around the dog's face and he's trying to fight the handler to do his job and go to odor, I don't have any, it's not shocking to me when they fail 10 NW3s because they never address those problems. Dog, one of the other ones I'm famous for, right, is dog walked past aid 4 times. Well, this is something the dog has learned to do. The first time, mom didn't recognize it. Second time, I was close, but she pulled me off. So I went, or they just give up, right? Some dogs are just going to say, oh, we're not playing that game today because you pulled me off of it 5 times. And so those comments I try to give out because there's just, you've been with me, Joanne. There's just not enough time to say, oh, you did this good and this good and this good, and you might look into that. You've got a couple of seconds to write, your leash was not good, your dog walked past the aid 3 times, and that's why you failed today. And so hopefully it's taken with a good spirit. That's the spirit that I mean it in, is certainly just for the learning and the professional advancement of the team.
Well, Don, Dave has the time to write all those nice things, so I'm just saying.
Dave. Dave.
I love Dave too.
So Pam had a follow-up question to odor intro. So you introduce 1 odor at a time. Yes. And you do birds.
Nancy, I can't hear you.
Oh, Pam Johnson, do you hear me now?
Yep.
Had the follow-up question. So she said you introduce 1 odor at a time. Birch, then anise, then clove, right?
I still didn't get the question. She said, is that the order you train it in?
Yeah.
So
Mostly.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Right.
Now with the rule changes, it doesn't matter. Just train them individually, but the order doesn't matter. And remember, if you have the right learning setup, this is done in 3 days.
Right.
This is not a lengthy thing.
Yeah. Yeah, usually we introduce birch first because that's the first odor they need. So we get the dog pretty strong on birch, and then we introduce the other ones pretty quickly thereafter. It doesn't.
Yeah, once the dog knows 1 odor, all the subsequent odors come quickly.
Yeah. So Terry Lucas asked how. We'll go back to that question.
Yep. So Diana has one. You sometimes write dog's not working at the start. Can you explain that? And also, how does a handler go about improving that? She says sometimes her baby dog misses the first hide, even though I think she's ready and working at the start line. I'm gonna say arousal, Diana, but go ahead, Don.
Yeah. So it's a great question simply because when I write that, the dog is past an aid, right? I know he's not working because he just blew past a training aid or a hide, as you call them. So I know he's not working. Or the dog's nose has been on the ground for the first 30 seconds of the search and has never acknowledged any of the other search area. And then the test for that is in many of your searches, the first item is hot. The first box is hot. The corner of the car is hot. The threshold is hot. That's how we know whether our dogs are working or not from the start. And what we're setting up here is the anticipation that it's always hot at the start, no matter what I'm doing. So then we counterbalance that now we've set an expectation that dog is absolutely looking from the start because there's always one at the start.
Yeah. So somebody asked about how to start young puppies. So how to start them. So there's quite a different ways of starting them, but how do you start young puppies?
So I don't compete in nose work. I don't have a nose work dog. The dog that I'm working with right now is going to be a narcotics dog. And I use the retrieve method for all of our working dogs. If I was starting a dog on the food method, there's a bunch of different ways. The pairing, I normally skip. So I might take something as simple as a jar, put 20 Q-tips in it. I hold it down. When the dog sticks his nose in the jar, I click and then throw the treat away. I don't use the clicker in anything else, any other portion of detection work, and I only use it there as a start that's the behavior we're looking for. The nose deep in the jar. We won't know if they're inhaling or exhaling with the sole exception of time. A dog doesn't stick his nose in a jar and hold his breath for 3 seconds. So he puts his nose in the jar for 2 or 3 seconds. I can assume he's gotten the odor, and then we'll move it around until the dog is actually hunting for the odor, and then it drops right into the hide and seek game. If it's a young puppy, they can do the same thing. Or Mike Suttle and I have done seminars together where we use the toilet flanges that have a hole in it.
Mm-hmm.
And normally within about 60 to 90 seconds, we have a dog doing a 2-hole variable with 100% correctness. And in 3 minutes, they're doing a 3-hole variable with a food distractor with 100% correctness.
So Don, so one of the, because people find the odor part to be the sexy part, like that's what they want to get to. But what I see with some of the people who've started on odor, they think that odor obedience is the only thing. That dogs do need to learn problem solving, and that's where I see they lack a lot of that. They just put them on odor and they think that's it. And the dog doesn't have the skills to work out problems, so they have issues. So they need to do both things, right? Work on.
Yeah, I was doing privates today, and I gave this talk to everybody that came. When we're talking about the foundational layering of a good detector dog, odor recognition is first, discrimination is second, discrimination distractions are third, and then thresholds are fourth. The reason I feel that way is, first, in order to bring reinforcement, the dog has to know what odors he's looking for, right? Then the second fundamental is he has to experiment and know what's not going to get paid. You can smell the bleach or the masking tape or the pee, none of that's going to get paid.
Right.
And then when we talk about the distractions, a little bit of noise, a human in the search, a cat in a cage in the search, to start to build up the dog's resiliency to the distractions. And then we're going to go back to odor recognition for our thresholds. 1 Q-tip to 500 Q-tips and all points in between. Or 1 seed or 2 seeds of marijuana. Well, not marijuana. That's not good anymore in Illinois. But a couple minor grams of cocaine to 1,000 pounds of cocaine and all points in between. And so those are if you get those fundamentals matched down, then we add in our good handling and our aid placement, and then we start to work on the search plan. And then at the final little bit of the end, we throw in the trained final response. Not that it's not important, but all of those other things far outweigh the trained final response.
Right. So Michael asked, what's the best way who's a dog who's highly food motivated to ignore and not signal on a food distraction? Michael, I can give you this answer real quick, but I'll let Don talk about it. I have an extremely food motivated lab. And all I did was make sure that she understood that only odor will get her food. That's she's very clear on that connection. Odor equals food. Once she figured that out, she's never false on a distractor ever. She will ignore food to get to odor to get her food.
Yeah. And you hit it on the head. I mean, that's what I do as well. The important part is, with a highly food motivated dog, is to show them they must demonstrate a behavior first that will always bring the food to them. If they demonstrate anything other than that behavior, they will not only get their food, they're not getting the distractor, they're not getting anything.
Right.
Then if you have a dog that just is really still struggling with that, It's like a dog that struggles with urine. So I like you've heard me say this at the seminars. I like containers because I can control a lot. But I
Mhm.
put out 20 boxes and 18 of them have dog piss in them. Pretty soon the dog's like, I don't even find this interesting anymore. I just want to go back to the other thing we were doing. And we do the same thing with food. I had a dog several years ago that had failed a couple times over a variety of cheeses. He came to me. We had 50 boxes of cheese and 5 hots. By the time the dog went through the third time, he's like, I don't care if I ever see cheese again. Cheese is
Mhm.
boring, but what brings cheese? The odor.
Right.
Every time I hit the odor, you give me cheese, I got this.
Right. And Jive had to make that connection because she's highly food motivated. But once it clicked in her head, that was
Yep.
it. She will not fault on food or anything else but odor. Or, she'll only hit odor.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, she's highly food motivated. Actually, she's so hard mouthed on it that it's a little painful.
So, speaking of falses, Jill had a question we missed a little earlier, which I think is interesting. So, Jill, I think not knowing your particular situation, I'm just going to ask a more general question. She said people she's trained with for years are now getting false alerts from their dogs. Is there something they're not seeing? Maybe, right? Or are they just waiting for a reward? So, I think I will ask the question in a different way. Don, as people move up levels and especially get to NW3s and elites, what are some of the reasons you see these dogs fall off or start false alerting?
So it's a great question. So remember, at the level 1 and the level 2, you know how many hides are there. So there's a level of confidence when you're walking into a search. You're only looking for 1 or you're only looking for 2.
Right.
When you get to the level 3, that element is off the table. Now you really need the search pattern and other things. What I believe happens is the handler has never really been involved with the search. They've kind of wandered around following the dog in the search. Now they have to pay attention to everything the dog is doing, and they add in these cues to the dog that have nothing to do with reinforcement or the odor. So they're reading the dog, they reach for their food pouch, and the dog's like, oh, that's on the table now. And so they start to create these falses in the dogs when they don't know the outcome of the searches. And that, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if you had worked your search plans in the 1s and 2s, you don't care how many are out there because you're truly clearing the room. You're not after a target number, you're after a room clearance in any level, or you're after a container clearance in any level. And so the falses don't necessarily come from more experience. They come from bad experiences that muddy the dog's idea of what brings reinforcement and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And Don, do you think too, as people move up and I think Jerry had that question about how do you prepare a dog for NW3? I think as people move up in level, they work really hard hides all the time, and they don't do, that's why I was asking that reinforcement question earlier about doing some fun and keep that odor obedience high. They just do really difficult hides and causing a lot of confusion in the dog.
Well, and I would ask people, Nancy, like, what is an example of and nobody needs to answer this, but in their own mind, give me an example of a hard hide, okay? Or have them think about that. And now remove your birch, and I want you to tape this 4-day-old baby bunny right where that aid was. Is that still a hard hide for that dog? And the answer 99% of the time is absolutely not,
No.
right? If we taped baby bunnies where we taped our hardest hides, the dogs would be plucking them down like no tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's only a hard hide because we haven't prepared the dog with the concept of an inaccessible, or the concept of a high, or the concept of conversion.
Right.
I mean, I tell this joke all the time, but if converging odor really messed up dogs, imagine a group of beagles that are out hunting, and the rabbits say, everybody get over here, let's converge our odors, and they'll never find us. And the beagles are like, damn it, it's converging odor, we have no success today, we're going to go home. That never happens.
No.
And so it's only these anthropomorphic ideas that we add into not a complex problem. Highs are not complex. Inaccessibles are not complex.
No.
when we've properly prepared the dog for that level of training.
Right.
And they should all be fun. If you're setting up hides that aren't fun for the dog, you're going into it with a completely wrong attitude.
Right.
When our dogs are doing high aids, and I've told you before, Nancy and Joanne, about my rotation, but when we're doing a high aid week, the dogs are just as happy if we're doing low aids or vehicles or containers.
Right.
They don't know what's not fun because it's all fun.
Right. Right. It should be all fun. Yeah. It's just that people get really wrapped up in, they get wrapped up in the difficulty and all that, and they don't keep it fun for the dog. And and introducing the different concepts to the dog on a regular basis. It is not dinner time, honey. She's
that's the no distractor lab.
Into the screen.
She thinks it's time to eat now, so her alarm is right on the money.
So Lisa had a question. I know it was about the start line question. I'll just answer that. Blow past with no change of behavior or with a change of behavior. It was no change of behavior to get the dog not working from start comment, right?
Right.
I couldn't hear you, Joanne.
I didn't move.
Did you answer it?
I did. So when you write a dog's not working from start line, they're not offering a change of behavior, right?
Right. So
yeah.
The dog doesn't offer anything because it's not working.
Right. Okay.
And so it's incapable in those instances too. Like, yes, technically it's a miss, but if the dog isn't working, is it really a miss? Right.
Right.
And so that's where, when you see at the trials, those of you that are listening at the trials, when you're holding that dog back in the harness and you're prepping him up, are you ready to go to work? Are you ready to go to work? Do you really think that dog's going to get the threshold that's 3 inches inside the search area? Absolutely not, ever.
Right.
Because you're ramping them up to run into the room and search the stuff. Remember, every inch of a search area is just as important as every other inch in the search area.
Right.
And that was proven, Nancy, at your elite trial at Boomers. 5 back-to-back threshold hides.
Yes.
I mean, and how many people got all 5? Goose egg. We had a couple, I think 3 or 4 that got 4. Nobody got all 5 because the mind starts to take over. What we should do is search everything the same way. But what happens is, surely no CO is going to give us 5.
Yeah, and it's like, yep, some will.
So I have a question. I ask, when we have judges on, I ask this question for every judge. What is your criteria for marking that pronounced on a score sheet?
Oh, it's super easy for me. It's a dog that is doing his job to the best of their capabilities, that is attached to a handler that are doing everything to the best of their capabilities. They move around the room in unison. They read each other perfectly. Something as subtle as the handler shifts their weight and the dog goes in that direction, or the dog stops to investigate and the handler gives the dog sufficient leash to investigate, make the discrimination or make the find, and call it either way. Oh, that's nothing. We're going on. And so for me, it's true teamsmanship. I will say this, very infrequently, I will give it to someone that just has a dog that is so great on their own that they didn't need a handler to be in the room with them. And so I don't see that a lot, but I also will give that dog the pronounce for that kind of activity. But for me, it's that perfect unison of true canine teamwork.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Well, yeah, and that's actually how, that's always the goal. But when we get to trial, the nerves set in and it doesn't look like that. So Garnet had, how do you train your dog to find actual odor versus the odor that's pooled next to something close?
So I find actual odor where?
Versus pooling.
So pooling is another one of those myths, right? If you see how easy, Joanne and I have talked about this. I use smoke. Joanne was using some dry ice. Have a pool of dry ice and just lightly run your finger through it. It's not pooling anymore. The fact that a door opens and closes 20 feet away ruins the pooling. The other thing, if that really was a thing, we would take all our baby bunnies and put them in a basket to pool their odor, and no beagle would find them. I guarantee if I put 5 baby bunnies in a basket, Jive isn't fooled for a second, right?
Right.
And so the pooling odor is another concept that humans have put into the dog that with very, very little training in that area, the dogs will begin to, I generally believe, Nancy, when people say that, remember when we talk about bracketing, the dog has alerted to odor and now they're bracketing. So remember the nostrils work independent of each other. The right side is wired into the brain separately from the left side. So when they're going and doing this, it's pumping in this information. Basically, if you want to be anthropomorphic, go left, wait, left's getting weaker, go right. And that's
Right.
where we get this beautiful bracketing. When we do enough of the field work, that dog has honed in those skills for anise birch clove, C4, det cord, whatever. He didn't ever need to do that for baby bunnies. That's already wired into him. So when we're doing these man requests on what we want you to search and find, they kind of need some conditioning and training for that. That's where all the open area and the field works come from, to really honing in the brain and the nostrils so they go right to left really, really quickly, and then make the decision to pull the trigger. Instead of, they seem to be confused by equal amounts of odor to the left and equal amounts of odor to the right. And in those cases, a lot of times what we needed to do is teach the dog that the bracketing is not always horizontal. Sometimes it's vertical.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they go up high, they get the eureka moment. Oh, this is stronger. Wait, higher is even stronger. And then they crawl up the wall to get the high highs. But again, it's the concept preparation and the training aids that allow that learning to take place.
Because I think sometimes the dogs hit pooling odor because a lot of times you see that a lot when the dogs when they do a lot of blind searches, and they don't know where the hide is, and the dog is trying to figure it out, and they might call alert, and it just create some of that confusion for the dog.
Yeah.
Right. There's different. Dogs should always work to the strongest source of the odor, so that pooling then won't be a problem.
And the other thing is just the language, right? If everybody on the call was a marine mammal trainer, if somebody used a term that wasn't in our scientific book, everybody would shake a stick and chastise them. But with the dog community, somebody says drive, but when you say drive, it doesn't mean the same thing as when I say drive. And then you start getting into pooling, what somebody else is visualizing when they say pooling is something different than what you and Joanne would say, or something different than what I might say. And right. So I say it's a tracing the source issue. Just because there happens to be a bunch of odor there, I don't call it a pooling problem. It's a tracing the source problem. The dog is jammed up and they can't make this decision on left, right, high, or low, so they're stymied there. Same thing with converging odors. But there's those little secrets that once the dog gets those eureka concepts in literally 20 minutes of training time, all those problems go away.
Right. Because Pam said odor does blow and move. So you're saying there's no trapping or pooling. No, there is, but the dogs need to learn. The odor is moving, but the dogs need to learn to go to the strongest source of that odor, which is what I was trying to explain.
Right. And Tony, yeah, you're right. And I was having this conversation because Don was at the last AKC trial. You didn't get the full force of it because Buried happened to be inside, but I think that is one of the worst elements that creates sort of that trapping pooling problem, where that odor swirls around in those containers and the dogs really, really just have to work that skill to know not to alert there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Tony, I did see one of your searches. I did see that search, Tony, that you mentioned. And I think Gigi is not as clear on getting to odor as she should be at this level. So it's a whole nother, it's not really a pooling problem. Something, so something else. Anybody have any other questions? This was pretty awesome. We got a lot of great information, and I hope you got to get to know Don and his intentions. So when you see him,
I can't hear you.
I hope you got to get to know Don a little bit better and his thought process when he's doing when he's judging, so that hopefully some of you won't be as worried about him at the trials. So.
And he does smile, just so you guys know. I hope you saw it a couple times tonight.
Definitely. So don't forget to follow. If you want to, we're going to do a lot more. We have a lot more guests coming up in the next few months, or a few weeks actually. So if you want to keep abreast of what's going on, follow us on our Facebook page, For Your Canine, or For Better For Worse, and then you'll get notified when we're having different people on. Thank you all so much, and also Don, if you want to do a private or get some information to see him, please reach out to us and we'll get you that information. Thank you all. It was great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys very much for having me on.